The moment I walked into that room, I knew my marriage was over. But what I didn't know was just how deep the betrayal went, and how far I would go to take back my life. As I approached the table, I came to a halt, my entire body stiffening. Julia's jaw had dropped so dramatically that it gave her a rather unflattering look, her shock written all over her face. Across from her, Douglas instinctively began to rise from his seat, but I swiftly raised a hand, signaling him to stay put. "No, Douglas, don't move," I said, my voice low and steady. "As long as you remain seated, you're safe. But if you stand, I won't have a choice, I'll rip you apart." I wasn't looking to cause a scene, but I wasn't about to let this moment pass in silence either. With a forced calmness, I offered an apology for intruding on their intimate little rendezvous, though my words dripped with sarcasm. The tension in the air was suffocating, thick enough to choke on. Then I turned to Julia, my voice laced with disappointment. "So this is why you pretended to be sick?" I asked, shaking my head. "You faked being unwell just to avoid spending the weekend with me, all so you could be here with him?" I glanced at Douglas with pure disdain. "Of all people, Julia, you chose him?" My chest tightened as I looked around the restaurant, our restaurant. This wasn't just any place. This was where we first met, where I got down on one knee and asked her to be my wife, where we had built so many cherished memories. But now it was tainted. Just like her. "On our wedding day, you stood before me and made promises," I continued, my voice shaking, not with fear but with the sheer weight of betrayal. "You vowed to love, to honor, to be faithful. And yet here we are." I had never felt such a deep, aching sense of loss before. The Julia I once knew, the woman I had trusted, the woman I had built a life with, was gone. Replaced by a stranger. Flashback to the beginning. It had all started so perfectly. Working for Greg Gray, the owner of the company, had been a privilege. He was a fair and admirable man, someone who recognized hard work and rewarded it accordingly. Thanks to his guidance, I had quickly climbed the corporate ladder, finding both success and fulfillment in my career. And it was Greg who had introduced me to Julia. I still remember that Christmas party vividly. It was an extravagant affair, filled with laughter, music, and the clinking of champagne glasses. That night, Greg had pulled me aside with a knowing smile and said, "There's someone I'd like you to meet." Julia, as it turned out, was his goddaughter, the daughter of his closest friend. From the moment we met, there was an undeniable connection, a spark I couldn't ignore. Looking back now, I realize Greg had orchestrated that introduction with the hope that we would end up together. At the time, I had been nothing but grateful. Now it felt like the cruelest twist of fate. The lies begin. Just days before our planned trip to Cleveland, Julia had told me she still wasn't feeling well. I had tried to be understanding, even reassured her that her health came first. But when she failed to even respond after that, I knew something was off. Left with no other choice, I called Adam, our close friend, to let him know of the change in plans. His suggestion had seemed like a good compromise at the time: cancel the Cleveland trip and instead have both couples come to Chicago for a relaxing weekend together. If Julia felt up to it, we'd enjoy a nice dinner on Saturday. But now, standing here in front of her and Douglas, I realized how naive I had been. Julia never had any intention of coming to Chicago to be with me. She had already made other plans. Back in my hotel room at the Drake, I sat in silence, staring at my phone. I had turned it off when I checked in, unwilling to deal with any calls or messages. But now, curiosity got the better of me. I powered it on. A few missed calls. Several unread messages. All from Julia. But I didn't need to hear them. I already knew what they would say. Without a second thought, I deleted them all. Because some betrayals don't deserve a response. I let the phone ring, watching as the call went to voicemail. There was nothing left to say. Instead, I turned my attention to setting up my appointments for Tuesday morning. Once everything was in place, I finally allowed myself to relax, sinking into the couch to watch some football. The next morning, I met with my longtime attorney, Roger, to discuss my options. Divorce was inevitable, and I needed to make sure I had the best possible representation. As we sat in his office, Roger leaned back in his chair and let out a deep sigh. "John, I can't believe you're really going through with this," he said, shaking his head. "I've never seen anyone love their wife as much as you love Julia." I met his gaze, my expression unwavering. Keyword Roger, loved. Past tense. Because I don't feel that way anymore. He studied me for a moment before nodding. "So what's next?" I didn't hesitate. "I'm filing for divorce." Roger paused before offering his advice, his tone carrying a trace of arrogance. "Look, I know this isn't what you want to hear, but you should consider reconciling with Julia instead of filing. If you want to keep your job, that might be your only option. I scoffed, barely believing what I was hearing. What are you talking about? Greg made it clear, Roger continued. If you go through with the divorce, you'll be out of a job. Sure enough, later that day, Greg called me into his office. His face was unreadable, but his words carried an unmistakable weight. Work things out with Julia, he said, his voice low and firm. Or consider yourself fired. I leaned back in my chair, raising an eyebrow in feigned surprise. You honestly think I can just forgive her? After what she did to me? I shook my head, letting out a bitter chuckle. You know how much I despise Douglas for what he did to Barb, and yet Julia ran straight to him. You expect me to pretend like that didn't happen? That our marriage isn't completely destroyed? Silence hung between us for a long moment before I stood up. No, Greg. There's nothing left to discuss. And with that, I walked out. That was the last time I set foot in that office, the last time I looked back. I had lost my wife and my job in the span of a single day, but strangely, I felt more relief than regret. I called Adam Hartley later that evening and told him everything, about the divorce, about losing my position at Gray System Solutions, about how my entire life had changed in a matter of days. His response was simple. I respect your decision, man. That same night, I received one final message from Julia. This will be the last message I send you. I love you more than anything in this world, but I understand that the choice is yours now. I'm truly sorry for all the pain I've caused you, for making it so hard for you to even speak to me. My love for you is unshakable, and when you're ready, I'll be here. Even if it's just to listen. Her words were laced with sadness, but I didn't respond. I had made my decision, and nothing she could say would change that. True to her word, I never heard from Julia again. And just like that, it was over. I wanted to object, to refuse outright, but Jacob placed a firm hand on my shoulder and stopped me. John, just go to the first session, he advised. See how you feel afterward. If you still want the divorce, then tell the counselor directly and make it clear. See what happens next. Reluctantly, I agreed. But the session turned out to be a complete disaster. Julia begged. She apologized. She pleaded with me to reconsider, to give our marriage another chance. Tears streamed down her face as she grasped at anything that might make me stay. The counselor listened patiently, though he didn't seem particularly invested in either side. Maybe he had seen this scenario too many times before. Another broken couple, another desperate attempt at reconciliation. But for me, there was nothing left to salvage. I had already felt the love I once had for Julia slipping away, but when I walked into that restaurant and saw her sitting there with Douglas, it was as if something inside me died. The closer I got to their table, the heavier the emptiness in my heart grew. By the time I walked out of that restaurant, that emptiness had consumed everything. All the love we had shared, all the memories we built together, gone. That's why I can't keep being married to her. There is no love left. And I refuse to stay in a marriage that has become hollow. It may sound cruel, but it's the truth. I finished my story with a heavy heart. Julia's tears should have moved me. Once they would have. But now, they couldn't bring back something that was already dead. The next morning, I was escorted to my court-ordered session by a police officer. He waited while I prepared, showered, shaved, and dressed, before accompanying me to the meeting. He remained present until the session concluded. The process was standard. Psychological evaluations, a survey, the usual formalities. I complied without resistance, answering every question as honestly as I could. At the end of the session, Dr. Graham walked me to the exit and turned to the officer. Mr. Yush has shown full cooperation and has committed to attending the next session as scheduled. I nodded, knowing it was just another box to check off before I could finally be free. Later that day, I found myself facing Greg once more. You do realize, he began, that your termination had nothing to do with your job performance. It was purely due to the situation with Julia. I already knew this. What he didn't know was that I had recorded our previous conversation. Why did you feel the need to record it? John asked. I met his gaze, unwavering. Because I know how deeply you care for Julia. I had a strong feeling you'd do everything in your power to stop this divorce. Greg exhaled sharply, then nodded. Fair enough, he admitted before shifting gears. Listen, John. I'm confident that the new software I'm developing will bring me enormous success, and I'm willing to. I cut him off. I'm not interested, Greg. This conversation was over. When the time came for my next legal meeting, I walked in feeling stronger than I had in weeks. I turned to Jacob, my lawyer, and spoke with newfound conviction. Jacob Lissman, you're fired. From now on, I'll represent myself. He didn't argue. He simply nodded. With renewed confidence, I stepped forward, ready to defend my position. Julia's lawyer also agreed to my request for self-representation, and moments later, the judge addressed us. "What's the matter, Mr. Barton?" he asked, his voice carrying the weight of authority. "Your Honor," I said firmly, "I would like to request a private meeting in your chambers to resolve this matter once and for all." This needed to end. And I was ready. "I truly believe that if we hold this meeting, we can come to a fair resolution," Julia's lawyer argued. "I understand John's pain, but it's important to remember that Julia is hurting too. Please, Your Honor, just give her a few minutes of your time." The judge listened carefully before responding. "If you approve the divorce today, there will be no need to take this matter beyond this courtroom," Julia's lawyer continued. When we reconvened, the final decision was made. The divorce was granted and the division of assets was settled. We each kept our respective investment accounts and split our shared savings evenly. It was agreed that the current joint account would remain active until all outstanding bills were paid. And just like that, it was over. Later that day, I found myself in an unexpected situation. I had informed my new employer that I needed a fully equipped computer workstation to complete some pending tasks. The rest of my day would involve minimal collaboration with Juliet, one of my colleagues, but my primary focus was preparing a package for installation and implementation. Internet access was essential for my work, and once I had everything set up, I felt a sense of calm wash over me. To my surprise, the day turned out to be quite enjoyable. Despite everything that had happened, I couldn't deny that I had always admired Julia's intelligence and sharp wit. She was still the same woman, humorous, beautiful, and effortlessly charming. As our workday wrapped up, I found myself reluctant to let our conversation end. In a moment of spontaneity, I grabbed a bottle of wine, thinking it might be nice to continue our discussion outside the office. Maybe I just needed a little more time to process things before fully moving forward. But then, something unexpected happened. I saw her. With another man. It hit me like a punch to the gut. Confusion flooded my mind, quickly followed by uncertainty. How could she have been so adamant about wanting to rebuild things with me, only to already be involved with someone else? Had everything she said been a lie? She had barely spent any time in Cleveland, yet here she was, already moving on. I knew I had to deal with my emotions in a healthy way. Recognizing that I was struggling, I decided to seek professional help. I started seeing a psychologist, and after a few sessions, I slowly began to feel like myself again. Though I didn't continue therapy with Dr. Graham, I remained committed to the process, and over time I felt myself getting back on track. I even started dating again. Nothing serious, just casual outings, conversations, and the occasional connection. But I wasn't in a rush to fall in love again. Not yet. Instead, I focused on rebuilding my life. I stabilized my finances, found joy in new routines, and accepted that some things in life simply are what they are. And now, 5 years later, I can finally say that I'm at peace. The last time I saw Julia, I barely even looked at her. I had no desire to see her, no lingering feelings left to process. Earlier that day, I had prepared myself carefully, spraying on Jim's favorite cologne, a habit that had become second nature when I was around him. But to avoid raising suspicion, I came up with a quick excuse. I accidentally spilled some cleaning solution on myself while looking for Kleenex in the office supply closet, I had said. Jim believed me without question, nodding absent-mindedly. After taking one final glance around, I left. When I got home, I paused at the front door, scanning the street. Something was off. Jim's pickup truck wasn't parked in its usual spot in our driveway. Instead, it was stationed in front of our neighbor's house. A strange feeling settled in my chest. Jim was a man of routine. He always parked in the same spot. He always came home at the same time. He always did what was expected of him. So why was today different? Had he finally started to question things? I had done everything I could to be the husband Julia deserved, but it wasn't enough. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't ignore what she had done. And I wasn't about to pretend anymore. That night, I made my decision. I was leaving town, immediately. It wasn't the first time I had used that excuse, but I knew it would be the last. Maybe you're wondering why I didn't confront her outright. Why I didn't sit her down and tell her that I knew the truth. If I told her I had caught her, she wouldn't regret cheating. She would only regret getting caught. I had seen it before, the rehearsed apologies, the empty words. But I wasn't interested in hearing them this time. I had been nothing but loyal, yet she still looked right through me, distracted and distant, as if I had become invisible in my own home. Would she even notice if I disappeared for a few days? Probably not. Julia was too preoccupied, always somewhere else, lost in thoughts she never shared with me. I could never figure out what she wanted or why she had strayed. I had spent months trying to understand, trying to find some logic in it all. But the truth was simple. She didn't love me. Not in the way I had once loved her. The project is almost finished, but I need to be there to oversee the final stages of construction, I told her casually over dinner. She barely reacted. For the first time in months, she didn't argue, didn't push back, didn't ask when I'd be back. She just nodded and accepted it. And that's when it hit me, how easy it had become for her to let me go. In the past, she would get upset, demand an explanation, even question why I needed to leave so suddenly. But now, she just didn't care. And that told me everything I needed to know. The morning I left for work, something felt different. Julia didn't protest like she usually did. There was no sigh, no reluctant goodbye, just a simple nod as if my absence didn't matter. That should have been my first clue. Not long after, I found out the truth. Julia's perspective. With Sam, I felt like the most cherished woman in the world. He was attentive, caring, and made me feel truly seen. When we returned to his house or a hotel room, I wanted nothing more than to show my gratitude for the incredible experiences we shared. But no matter how passionate our moments were, I couldn't shake the growing distance between me and Jim. Perhaps it was time to end this affair. The thought of Jim discovering my infidelity sent a cold wave of fear through me. If he found out, what would he do? Would he leave me? Would he hurt Sam? Or worse, would he do both? Lately, my emotions were barely concealed. I could hear it in my own voice, the hesitation creeping in, the guilt weighing heavier. And yet, when Sam looked at me with that unmistakable hunger in his eyes, all my doubts faded, at least for a little while. "Oh, Jel, you're so beautiful," he whispered, his voice thick with desire. His hands moved skillfully, unbuttoning his shirt, his lips parted with anticipation. It had been so long since Jim had looked at me that way. He had become cold, distant, rough. But Sam? Sam saw me. That was why I let this affair continue for so long. The next week passed in a blur of passion and deception. Sam spent his nights at my house. During the day, we indulged in each other, long hours wrapped up in intimacy, followed by candlelit dinners at restaurants. We lived in our own little bubble, exhausting ourselves with stolen moments before falling into a deep, dreamless sleep. But as I lay in bed, tangled in sheets that weren't just mine and Jim's anymore, guilt gnawed at my soul. I was a married woman, bound by vows I had already broken. Meanwhile, my new job provided an unexpected distraction. Terry welcomed me warmly and introduced me to my new team, a group of 14 people who radiated kindness and positivity. There were 3 men and 11 women, not counting Terry, Pam, and me. Though I wasn't stepping into some heroic role, they embraced me as if I were someone they had been waiting for. After all the chaos of the past few months, I couldn't have been more grateful. And yet, no matter how much I tried to focus on the fresh start ahead of me, I couldn't escape the weight of what I had done. Finding a place I could finally call my own brought an unexpected sense of relief. It felt like a fresh start, something stable after months of chaos. When it came time to choose a lawyer, I knew I needed someone with both skill and reputation. That's when I found Amanda. She was known for being sharp, relentless in the courtroom, and always on top of her game. Getting her to take my case, however, was another matter entirely. At first, she was hesitant. But when I laid everything out for her, the truth about Jel's actions, her repeated infidelities, her secret affair, Amanda's doubts vanished. She understood that Jel had broken our vows, that she had no interest in reconciliation, and that she had already moved on long before I ever found out. That was all the convincing Amanda needed. She took my case without hesitation, and as time passed, I learned more about the man who had destroyed my marriage. So, it turned out I wasn't the first husband left in his wake. He had a history of causing wreckage. Countless marriages had ended because of him. But none of that mattered now. I wasn't looking for justice or revenge. I just wanted to close this chapter of my life and move forward. Jel's perspective. The thought of ending things with Sam weighed heavily on me, but I knew it had to be done. Jim would be home in a few days, and I needed to erase every trace of my affair before then. No lingering scent, no stray hair, no remnant of Sam left in my home, or on me. That night, a phone call momentarily pulled me from my thoughts, but even the distraction wasn't enough. Eventually, exhaustion took over and I dozed off. The next morning, Friday, I was at work when an unexpected confrontation blindsided me. Mary, one of my closest friends, stormed up to my desk, her expression a mix of disbelief and fury. "What happened to you?" she demanded. "Are you stupid or just completely insane?" I barely had time to react before she continued, her voice growing louder. "Jel, that man adored you. He worshipped the ground you walked on. And you threw it all away? You must be out of your mind to let a man like Jim slip through your fingers. I opened my mouth to respond, but she wasn't finished. Even on his worst day, your so-called lover couldn't compare to Jim. Not even close. What were you thinking? Her words hit like a slap to the face. I sighed, my voice laced with bitterness. I never meant for him to find out. I just wanted to have a little fun. Mary shook her head, her disappointment clear. Husbands always know. They may not say anything at first, but they notice. The way you start acting different. The way you become distracted, distant. You thought you were hiding it, but Jim felt it. I wanted to argue, to defend myself, but what could I even say? She was right. And now it was too late. As a result of the divorce, I lost everything. Not just my husband, but the love he had for me, the deep, unwavering, pure love that had once made me feel like his queen. I had destroyed it. I had tainted something beautiful beyond repair, making forgiveness impossible. Even for myself. If I were in his place, I wouldn't be able to forgive me either. Mary sighed as she finished her scathing words. And all I could do was whisper, "Oh my God, he's really gone." Regret settled deep in my chest, heavy and suffocating. And for the first time since this all began, I truly understood what I had lost. I was left completely alone. The silence was deafening. Nothing about my situation seemed promising, but Mary's voice echoed in my mind. "Jill, I know this looks hopeless right now, but if you make an effort, if you really fight for it, you might still be able to earn his forgiveness." But deep down I knew the truth. Jim was gone. He had found out everything, walked away, and filed for divorce without hesitation. And yet, a part of me wondered, if I had truly wanted to be with Sam, if he was really what I wanted, then why did it still feel like I had lost something irreplaceable? Maybe because I had. Maybe because, despite everything, I was still suffering over Jim. Jim's perspective. I may not have agreed with what she did, but I understood why she did it. "Jim," Amanda said, her voice calm but firm, "she's going to resist this divorce. She's going to drag it out, and it's going to become costly. If we can talk to her, convince her to settle, we can avoid a prolonged battle." I let out a slow breath. Jill had betrayed me, humiliated me, and destroyed the foundation of our marriage. But now, she was the one clinging to something that no longer existed. I didn't want a drawn-out fight. I wanted it over. So, against every instinct, I agreed to try. Jill's perspective. The weight of my choices had finally caught up to me. Sam was gone, facing a prison sentence that would take him out of my life forever. Jim was gone, on his way to becoming my ex-husband. And what was left of our marriage? A stack of legal documents waiting to be finalized. I was still in my prime, still had time to rebuild, to start over. But how long would that last? Time wasn't on my side forever. One day, I would find myself in a position where starting a family, finding love again, and repairing the damage I had caused would no longer be possible. I had already lost the man I once truly loved. And now, I was losing myself. Mark's perspective. I should have seen the signs. Karen's late nights at the office, where she worked as her boss's secretary. The way our intimacy faded, how she avoided my touch, how she barely seemed interested in me at all. The provocative clothes appearing in her closet, ones I had never seen her wear in my presence. The way she barely spoke to me anymore, even at the dinner table with our two children, Max and Megan. At first, I convinced myself it was just stress, just a phase. But her absence at home became more frequent, her attention toward me nearly non-existent. And then, the final blow. She must have thought I was in shock because she kept talking, as if she was doing me a favor by confessing. "Mark, it was incredibly difficult for me to hide this from you," Karen said softly. "I didn't want you to get hurt. But I can't keep lying." I just stared at her. "I'm not leaving you," she continued as if that made it better. "But my relationship with Jason. I can't give it up. I need it. I hope you can understand." I let out a hollow laugh, not because it was funny but because it was so absurd. She really thought this was reasonable? That I would just accept it? That was the moment it became clear to me, Karen had already made her choice. And now it was time for me to make mine. I should have known. If I had uncovered her infidelity, it meant she had likely taken precautions to keep it hidden. She must have believed that having an arrangement with a so-called friend for intimacy would somehow soften the blow, prevent me from reacting too drastically if I ever stumbled upon the truth. She was wrong. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that fear had been driving her actions. She was terrified that I would find out, that I would catch her off guard. Well, she was right to be afraid. Because that was exactly what I intended to do. That evening, I stood in the shadows of my backyard, watching through the sliding glass doors. My phone, held steady in my hands, silently captured every moment, photo after photo of Jason and my soon-to-be ex-wife in our home, doing things that should have been reserved for our marriage. I silently thanked modern mobile technology for making it so easy to expose betrayal. Once I had enough, I slipped my phone into my pocket and stepped forward. With deliberate calmness, I slid open the glass door and walked inside, making my presence known. They saw me. And yet, they didn't even bother to stop. They continued as if I wasn't even standing there, as if my existence no longer mattered. The blatant disrespect sent rage coursing through my veins, but I forced myself to stay composed. I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of seeing me lose control. So I waited. 15 agonizing minutes passed before I finally heard the words I needed. Later that night, I found myself at a bar, drowning in my thoughts. The music was loud, the air thick with the scent of alcohol and regret. Curious about the commotion at the far end of the room, I turned to the bartender. "What's going on over there?" I asked, nodding toward the crowd gathering in the dimly lit corner. The bartender smirked and gestured in the same direction. I followed his gaze. And there, in the darkness, was Jason, wrapped around another woman, kissing her like she was the only person in the world. So, the cheater was now cheating on another cheater. I wasn't even surprised. Or maybe it wasn't cheating at all. Maybe the other cheater knew all about his extracurricular activities and just didn't care. Either way, it confirmed what I had already suspected. Jason wasn't special. He was just a man who thrived on betrayal, and my wife had been foolish enough to fall for him. A stranger nearby leaned in and muttered, "I overheard everything today. If you ever need a witness, I can testify." I gave a small nod. "Maybe I'll take you up on that." A few years ago, my wife had insisted on keeping a landline in the kitchen, claiming it was for emergencies. But I had a gut feeling. If she needed to call him, she would use that phone. And I was right. The intrigue was too tempting to ignore. 3 hours later, I returned home and retrieved the hidden recorder I had planted nearby. As she stepped outside to take out the trash, I slipped into my office and pressed play. The moment I heard her voice, my stomach twisted. "I love you," she whispered to him. Hearing those words broke me in a way I hadn't expected. Because she had never said them to me like that. Not in a long time. And maybe, not ever. I knew Jason never truly cared about her. And soon she would know it too. The night before, I had received a set of dated photos, irrefutable proof of Jason's betrayal. I couldn't wait to see the look on Karen's face when I showed them to her. If she thought she had lost everything already, she was in for a rude awakening. I sat in my office, a mix of emotions swirling inside me. Part of me was satisfied. Part of me was exhausted. But above all, I was done. When I finally stepped into the room where Karen sat, she turned and noticed me. Her eyes widened with shock. "Mark, why?" she stammered. I held her gaze, my expression unreadable. "Like you said, Karen," I murmured, my voice steady. "I deserve better." With that, I turned and walked away. Although I wasn't there to witness it, I later found out that Jason's downfall came swiftly. Reality hit him hard, so hard that he lost consciousness when he realized that his life as he knew it was over. He lost everything. His wife, his children, his home, his job, and all because of his own choices. For a long time, I thought Karen was the biggest fool in the world. But in the end, I was wrong. She was only the second biggest fool. When I finally sat down with her for the last time, I made myself clear. "I'll give you some money so you can find a new place to live," I told her. "But after that, you're on your own." Karen sat there in stunned silence. I leaned forward slightly, my tone unwavering. "The only condition of my generosity is that you will not fight this divorce. If you try to contest it, I will fight back with everything I have. And Karen, you have no idea what I'm capable of." Her lips parted as if to protest, but she hesitated. I could see it in her eyes. She was still holding on to some desperate hope that I would take her back, that I would allow her to continue her relationship with that pathetic excuse for a man. But she had miscalculated. Because this was the end. For good.